Okay, so I wanted to talk about the instinctual triads and how to type yourself and typing others as well. But it's mostly like what you see are a lot of posts about people trying to type themselves, and other people matter too, but really it has to start with you. So I think that it's worth understanding how each type fits into each triad, and then you can go from there. That's a good way of doing it. So I'll just talk a little bit about that, and in particular, I'd like to talk about how the types appear and manifest when they disintegrate, because that's often when people need help, and that's when the type becomes especially of use to them. So why don't we just go around the Enneagram, starting with the heart triad? And this is probably the easiest to understand in some ways, because this is the personality, of who we are, how other people perceive us, how we perceive ourselves, and whether people recognize us and whether we recognize ourselves, and who we are, and whether we are lovable. And that's why it's called the image triad. And when we don't take care of that effectively, respectively for each type, we feel shame. That's why shame was attached to this type, and this triad. And basically, each type in the triad has different ways that they try to compensate for this. So the twos focus very much on being there for you, and sort of being this unconditionally positive person who doesn't necessarily ask for more than they give. Generally, they try to give more than they ask for, and they often have an attitude that they can take care of themselves. And not only that, they can take care of other people as well. So it manifests differently depending on the instincts. It's modified by SPSO or SX in that domain. So for example, I won't go into all of them, but the self-preservation twos often are found in, working as a doctor or nurse, or somebody that takes care of others in a more formal capacity and has good self-care skills and independent living and so on at the same time, is a good way of looking at that archetype. So, early in life, they felt that they had to bring something to the table to others. Otherwise, they wouldn't be loved. So they see things in a very exchange-oriented way. And if they don't have anything to offer, which is going to be the case, at least some of the time, they need to know how to take care of themselves. So they, again, tend to be independent people. Yet in relationships, they can be incredibly codependent as well, because they develop the codependency with others. So, they have kind of an independence, codependency dichotomy operating. All right. And of course, finally, they feel shame when they look at themselves and find that they've harmed others or they've failed in those capacities. Next is the type 3. Threes, instead of feeling like they have to bring something to the table to others, instead they feel that they simply need to attract attention, to cast the spotlight on themselves, to shine. And it could be helping people. They have 2 right there as a wing. It could be, often it's performing. There's a performative aspect to it. And given the way our world operates, that performances are scrutinized heavily, For example, if you're a classical musician, you have to get up on stage, and if you're in a competition, they're going to check every note, and you have to be able to perform. It's not just about image. So the 3 becomes an incredibly competent, effective, successful person because they have to be in order to appear that way. When they disintegrate, that goes away. There's some element of that. They're able to maintain an image, but behind all of that, they're slipping because they're driving themselves into the ground. Basically, they tend to be workaholic, and if you wake up and work all day on the computer as a programmer, and you're getting promotions, and you're making 6 figures, times whatever, you're burned out. You become burned out. So then when you go to hang out with your friends or, spend time with your family or whatever, you're not all the way there. And they just become very disconnected people from their heart because they've basically sacrificed genuine emotions so that they can perform, so that they can act, and they cut off from it. They're incredibly good at simply detaching from what's really going on with them on a deeper level so that they can get tasks done. Like, it's incredible what 3s can do, how they can do mechanical, logistical things, while emotionally there's all this, things being repressed and not acknowledged. So the unhealthy 3 often doesn't even look that depressed. They look like somebody who's dealing with an issue, in a way that would be appropriate for what is revealed on the surface. But behind all of that, there's so much other, it's worse. It's always worse than it looks. And so they end up incredibly miserable. And the 3s often, or in my experience, are the type most likely to, lie, just to be liars. Because deception and vanity is at the heart of vainglory, is at the heart of the entire fixation. So image is traded for reality. Okay, next is the type 4. 4s. The 4 is really about authenticity and understanding the nature of the self and who am I. And aside from all the image stuff and the helping others stuff, who am I on a deeper level? And who are you? And what is the nature of who we are as people and our emotions and what makes people tick? And so you end up with a much more philosophical type. They can be kind of anti-image oriented. They will reject looking good. They will reject needing to be helpful. They will strip away all of the superficiality behind the image and try to get at the deeper, more complex issues. And they can find a real romanticism there, because when you start looking at what a person really is, it is something very complex and symbolic, and the 4s often thrive on symbols and art and kind of living your life almost as a metaphor and as a poem and poetry. They tend to be these sorts of people. But they sacrifice something in all of that. Each of the heart types, they sacrifice something. And they end up with this kind of tragic, melancholic, envious of other people attitude, like, well, I'm never going to be a real artist. I'm never going to be a successful commercial artist because I strove for authenticity instead. I strove for being genuine. I strove for getting to the complex issues and discovering myself. And they end up looking around at the world and saying, the problem here is I now don't relate to other people. I'm unusual and I'm strange, and admittedly, they can have a very negative, dark worldview because of what they've sacrificed. They have not shown up for other people the way the 2 and the 3 have. in some ways they've shown up for themselves, and they've tried to get to the answers and to the truth of human nature and what we all are, and you know, what makes us human beings and what makes us conscious. But out in the world, they're simply not there in the same way, and often they can become depressive because of it. They can thrive on this darker space, and then become a little bit almost counterphobic in it and say, well, okay, now that's the reality and that's what I'm dealing with, and so I'm now going to work that to my advantage. And they pull from 3, and they can, you know, step into the spotlight with that persona more easily. And you do find force like that in culture who, you know, look like the goth, or you know, somebody that's rough around the edges, and thrives on that and is able to make that work for them. But they can also end up feeling bad about themselves because they've gone so intentionally into that dark, authentic, honest space that, you know, they're kind of destroyed by it in a way, as anybody would be, because you can't sit around all day just focusing on the negative and the dark side about, you know, the fact that we're all going to die, and, you know, image is ephemeral, and, you know, the distance between people is in, you know, you can't cross that distance fully, and so they focus on the dark side, the negative and melancholy, and then they end up bitter as well towards other people, and can hurt other people that way. So, all right, that's the heart triad. I will go into the other triads in other videos, because these are going to be a little bit longer. Feel free to ask me any questions too if you'd like more clarification on how the types operate, how the triads work, and especially for typing yourself. Other people, it works with other people, but if you haven't typed yourself properly, it's going to be pretty hard to type others. I think you'll do it about 50% with others. And if you get yourself first, then you might be able to do it, you know, 70% or something. I think there's an art to it, and it has to start with you. So, all right, okay, thanks so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.